I'm John Batchelor. Larry Kudlow of Kudlow reports at CNBC each evening, 7 p.m. East Coast time, and Kudlow Radio on the weekend is here with me, and we're very pleased to welcome Lee Ohanian, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, as well as being a professor of economics and a director of the Ettinger Family Program in Macroeconomic Research at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. With his colleague John Taylor of the Hoover Institution, publishing most recently a presentation of these 5 years of the Great Recession and the frustration and puzzlement at the slow recovery. Professor, a very good evening to you. I take you to what I believe to be the heart of the argument that you make very carefully with Professor Taylor, is that the trouble things went bad right away. 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. How so? Good evening to you, Lee.
Good evening, John. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was, nearly $1 trillion of various temporary tax breaks and spending proposals, and the Obama administration advertised what's known as the stimulus plan as a way of making sure that unemployment never went above, I believe, 7%. Well, of course, unemployment went up to nearly 10%, and the number of jobs we have today as a share of the adult population is lower than when the stimulus plan went into effect. The stimulus plan increased our debt substantially, but it didn't do anything to bring jobs back, and standard economic reasoning says it shouldn't have, and we shouldn't have expected it to. It was, in my opinion, a significant policy mistake.
Lee, first of all, it's a great pleasure. I know many of your colleagues, and I love reading your stuff. I want to ask you, this is a serious question. Are you convinced that, in fact, we are in a recovery? And I'll tell you why I ask that. The volume of new jobs, quote unquote, is still below the level of 1987, late 1987, 2007, 2008. And also, capital spending, business capital spending, is in real terms, is still well below its peak of 2007. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, business capital spending, long-lived asset spending that creates jobs, is actually below where it was back in 2000. Now, are we, in fact, in a recovery?
No, we're not in a recovery, and that's a misperception of our economic situation by many folks. Larry, as you noted, capital spending and job creation are two of the centerpieces of a healthy recovery, and capital spending is way below trend. Job creation is way below trend. And a third piece is productivity growth. And, of course, productivity growth is rapid when businesses are making investments in technology and capital equipment, and productivity growth is low. So all three of those harbingers of a healthy economy are substantially underperforming. We're still in a recession. We can say that we're not, but we are still in a recession, very much so.
It's really an amazing thing. The guy, I tell you who talked to me about this about a year ago. I went to Washington and had a lengthy interview with Alan Greenspan, okay? And I think Greenspan knows something about how the real economy works. And he's the guy who turned me on to the capital spending. He said, go, draw the graphs, look at the numbers, and you'll be amazed what you see. And it's business capital spending that creates jobs. So we shouldn't be that surprised. Now, the question is, why won't businesses invest? That's the question.
Well, businesses are concerned about regulation associated with Obamacare. The cost of getting financing has gone up because of new costs imposed within Dodd-Frank financial regulation. And, of course, long-term capital spending projects which really the heart of a growing economy. Businesses are looking at the economic landscape and they say, we have no idea where economic policy is going. We know Obamacare will be costly, but we don't know by how much. We don't know what more broadly will do the economy. And now we have tax rates that are corporate tax rate that's, of course, among the highest in the world. And we have marginal personal tax rates now exceed 50% for the highest earners, those entrepreneurs who create jobs in a number of states. So we don't have a healthy economic fundamental, in my opinion, that will provide a foundation for long-run growth.
Do you know that a stat, new business formation, which used to be an important stat, people don't track it the way new business formation is way below what we had in the 2000s. I mean, it's virtually dried up in the United States.
No, absolutely, and you're right to point to that. That is so important for our continued economic success. Big, mature companies like General Motors and U.S. Steel, they have a lot of employees, but they're not growing jobs. Growth comes from new business creation, and of course only a small fraction of new businesses will become the new Apples and Googles and Microsofts of the world. But without that, we're not going to have the long-run economic growth that has been the hallmark of U.S. economic progress for more than 2 centuries. I'm really, really concerned about new business formation, and tax policy and regulatory policy and the institutions we've put in place that govern economic regulation are just simply not conducive to new businesses forming at the rate that we need to in order to get growth going again.
Professor, I want to stay with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, called the Stimulus Plan of 2009, because there's an additional point you make with Professor Taylor. It's not just that the unemployment number didn't match the promises made by the Obama administration in the first term. It's that the money paid to state governments, the federal funds supposed to be shovel-ready to stimulate growth, the state governments didn't use it to invest in anything or build anything. They paid down their debt, and they maintained what they could of their workforces, transfer payments, that sort of thing. Did the original planners of the stimulus plan know that was going to happen? Have they reviewed since then that they were wrong-headed right from the start, and that we've never had a chance because of the amount of money they spent to no end?
Well, there were a lot of implementation and conceptual problems with the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and it's almost inevitable that there would be. It was pushed out so quickly. But, John, as you point out, a lot of money went to the states, and the federal government advertised this as building roads,
right,
fixing bridges, but very, very little of that money went for those purposes. It essentially was a bailout for states that enabled them to pay down their debt, and then they increased transfer payments. This wasn't the type of infrastructure spending that was advertised, and I suspect, I don't know if the White House would ever come out and say this, but I suspect if they went back over and to see how the dollars were spent, I think they would be disappointed in terms of what they had anticipated would happen in terms of infrastructure and government capital spending process.
And Larry, you point out that's what Larry Summers organized, the stimulus plan. That was his team that put that into place.
It was. I mean, a smart guy. I guess Lee, those Keynesian multipliers never really panned out. I guess that's part of the issue. But if you turn this around for us, okay, give me a set of policies that's going to get American growth back to 4% where it belongs, and get businesses to start making the kind of long-run investments that'll really create jobs. Turn this around for us.
The first thing I would do would be to have a substantial overhaul of our tax program. We need to substantially cut the corporate tax rate. It's so distorting that it brings in very little revenue anymore because businesses are smart and they find ways around it. But we want them to spend time thinking about growing their businesses, not how to avoid the corporate income tax. Reducing marginal tax rates across the board is what we need to do in order to increase job creation. We need to reduce government spending and get entitlements under control, and we need to have environmental policies that make sense from today's economy. We all want cleaner air, but the EPA's recent ruling to cut coal emissions by 50% by fiat is simply not economically good policy. A tax on carbon would make more sense if the country wanted cleaner air. That's for voters to decide. But there's just a lot of ways we can go to increase the incentives for people to produce, for people to consume, for people to invest, and for people to work. And the tax system is the first place to start. Energy and labor policy would come right after that.
The odd thing, the ironic thing when you mention the coal industry, the war on coal, I mean, tens of thousands of jobs are going to be destroyed by this. The regulations, as you know, are for new plants, but they're going to get around to existing plants also. That's coming next. It's energy, Lee. It's the oil and gas fracking that has been the one really great bright spot in the economy.
Absolutely. And we also have the issue of the Keystone Pipeline.
Right.
and the states such as North Dakota, energy abundant states are booming. They can't find enough workers. Wages are high, and now is the time, given the type of trouble we're looking in the Middle East. Now is the time to invest in those technologies and really bring that forward.
Lee, is there a conversation about using the federal lands, especially in the Rocky Mountains, for energy exploration and development? I know it would generate jobs immediately. I've seen a study about that out of Wyoming.
Yeah, the conversation should certainly be there. We spend so much on energy subsidies. We've spent over $25 billion subsidizing wind power. That, in my opinion, is
right.
just is a huge cost to taxpayers. So any type of energy policy, I think, has got to address.
Fossil fuel development on federal lands, in specific.
Yeah. I think that's got to be part of the conversation, and we have to have. Economics tells you we should have a cost-benefit study of that, and if the benefit exceeds the cost, that's something we should pursue. But we don't know until we do that, and but that seems to be politically off the table.
Larry, I just want your opinion. Everything the professor's saying describes something that isn't the Obama administration. Right. Is that a fair summary?
It's a pretty fair summary. It's an exactly fair summary. The only thing that Lee left out is a president who goes out on the campaign trail and bashes businesses. That's part. The psychology here is all wrong. Instead of praising business and entrepreneurs, the guy goes out there and bashes business and so forth. And that stuff, Lee, I know it's hard to measure, but I think it takes its toll. You're a businessman. Let's say you run a Midland business, middle-sized business, okay? Not GE, but a middle-sized business, and you hear the president going out there and knocking business down and calling them names and so forth and saying you didn't create that. I think that takes a psychological toll. I think it causes people to pull back. It's a little bit like the 1930s, Lee. Remember, we had a capital strike in the 1930s. All FDR did was all he ever did was bash businesses. I think it took a tremendous toll then, and I think it's taking a tremendous toll now. We have essentially a capital strike going on.
Well, we do, and Larry, I think you're right about the president's criticism of business. The Bill Gateses and Steve Jobs and Larry Ellison's of Oracle of the world, they have become wealthy because of the remarkable ideas that have created millions of jobs. These are the people that create what I call social surplus. We should be providing all the incentives we can for the new Steve Jobs and Bill Gates to go out there and risk their own capital and risk their own time and try to make a big splash, and in the course of doing so, create millions of jobs. We should be praising these people and thanking them and giving them incentives to be creative, but we're doing the opposite.
Professor, final question. 40 months to go with the Obama administration. Is that what's left to be done? We wait it out.
Given the makeup of Congress, I'm not sure if there's much more we can do.
Lee Ohanian, Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, Professor of Economics at UCLA. Larry Kudlow of the Kudlow Report, CNBC and Kudlow Radio across the country on the weekends. I'm John Batchelor.